A wild tragedy appears.
Are those proxy victims? Oh, joy! Oh, dogma! How can I make this all about my ideology?
This month, we learned from CNN, The Independent, and The New Yorker that individual human behavior does not matter. Folks, it's okay to forget about your morals, your compassion, your peaceful nature, your consideration for your fellow human being, because they mean absolutely nothing. In fact, you have to forget about those things, because if you talk about them, you'll be condemned for it. You see, someone who has a thing in common with you and millions of other non-violent, law-abiding individuals did a terrible thing over which everyone in their right mind is appalled, horrified. We are all searching for answers. Why the hell would someone do something like that? What possessed this person? How did they get to the point of deciding to do that? Rest easy, folks. The media has your back. They've got it all figured out. It has nothing to do with any of the adverse or dysfunctional influences in the individual's life that are known to increase the likelihood of this kind of behavior. Of course not. How could we even think such a thing? Obviously, the real reason this person did something so awful is because of whatever it is that someone has in common with you. That connects you with the terrible act and justifies a diatribe about how terrible everyone with that same thing in common is, regardless of whether there is any evidence at all that indicates that common thing as an actual influence on the person's choice of action. So, are you ready for your penance? Ready to make amends? To fix the problem as these media outlets see it? First, you must let people who do not have that factor in common define for you what it is, what its characteristics are, what represents a positive expression of it, and what flaws are unique to it. Ignore any lack of connection between the described peculiarities and the people you know who have this detail in common. Ignore any inconvenient logic fails like falsely conflating toughness with suppression of all emotion, conflating ruggedness with violence, or hastily generalizing rare character flaws to the entire group. Ignore the fact that in order to generalize like that, your detractors are including people in their list of villains who don't have the thing in common with you that they're citing as a cause. Clearly, exhibiting the reprehensible behavior that is characteristic of your demographic makes that individual one of you regardless. The fact that you notice these indiscrepancies is just your maladjustment as a member of the group in question speaking. Accept that your specific trait is original sin. Be prepared to understand its corrupt nature. Second, acknowledge the wiser authority of the wholly opposite, they who do not have your terrible trait in common, so that they may dictate to you that which you need to do in order to be a better person of the attribute in question. Do not make the mistake of believing that, having not done anything even remotely like the reprehensible acts of the villains of the day, you don't need such guidance. That's just your toxic singularity speaking. You must obey the wholly opposite. You must do penance for your original sin. You cannot rid yourself of your toxic singularity. You can only take measures to mitigate its impact. Therefore, finally, you must be prepared to accept that your toxic singularity justifies deferring any expectation you have of consideration for your human rights to your superiors, the wholly opposite. They shall decide for you whether said consideration is as much a human rights consideration in your case as it is for others, or whether being part of your specific demographic makes your expectation a function of your toxic singularity. You must not question that judgment, for if you do, you will be exhibiting opposogeny, a terrible form of bigotry against the wholly opposite that can, by its very nature, enslave whole populations for generations. Any semblance of argument against reduced consideration for your demographic is a clear sign that you are a singularity supremacist. Shame. CNN's Naz Modan and the Independent's Gloss Switch have informed us in the wake of the Vegas shooting that mass shootings are an epidemic that is unique to the U.S., caused by masculinity and whiteness. The New Yorker's Ronan Farrow had the same response to Harvey Weinstein's outing as a sexual predator, likely of the serial variety. Their solution? Condemn masculinity, condemn whiteness, and treat any manifestation of either as a sign of psychological impairment. After all, why should we as a society take trouble to individually address the actions of psychologically damaged, unstable people when hasty generalization-fueled autistic screeching feels so much better? Now, children, it's time to abandon your individuality and take on the mantle of guilt by even the loosest of associations. Let us sing the praises of the holy opposite. Virtue signaling is the way. Belonging is achieved today. We compete for who does it the most. Don't break that mold or you are toast. Welcome, brothers and sisters. Kneel, one and all. Kneel before the gods of media judgment. Come, join the congregation as we bathe our spirits in the light of the sacred virtue signal. Hallelujah! Praise. Shucks, you guys, I can't keep that up live. Welcome to Badger Talk, as we discuss the way political pundits and the press capitalize on the atrocities of the most messed up individuals to smear large groups of innocent, ordinary people. No, we're not here to condemn anyone for acknowledging that when dogma and doctrine encourage violence against outsiders, that can and often does result in atrocities. There is a stark difference between that and applying such a connection between that kind of violence, and race or sex, as several public personalities have done. I'm here with the Professor of Precision, Aiden Paladin, Woozle Slayer, Karen Strawn, that adorable specter of death, Prim Reaper, and, watching out for us, the Supreme Doge in charge, Brian Martinez, as we cleanse your souls of the latest propaganda. Everybody into the Badgertismal pool! Who wants to jump in first?
Oh my god, okay. The thing that's so fascinating to me about this entire topic, well, intergroup psychology is my primary area of research, and, well, my secondary area of research, but a big one for me that I know a lot about. So here I have pulled out Erving Goffman's, I believe, 1961 book on stigma, which is exactly what you're looking at here, is that when you talk about a stigmatized group, which is exactly what your video was really about, was the idea of a stigmatized group. Often, I mean, historically, and pretty much the way that humans operate as we are a social species, is to use cognitive heuristics. So I'm going to say, I can pick out a single individual and an example, and I will apply that to an entire group of people. Now, we're going to talk about a stigmatized group of people in that, in this case, in the public eye, I don't know, it could be anybody. It could be men's rights activists, or advocates. It could be anybody. But if they're slightly stigmatized in society in general, you're of course going to want to have to find the worst example and use that as an icon that it's basically a quick mental and cognitive way of applying all of the negative stigma that we associate upon that individual onto the entire group. There's lots of reasons for this. Primarily, though, it's because our brains are fairly simple in some ways, so we have to use these shortcuts. And using an example of a horrible person who does a terrible thing, that's a very easy shortcut.
Yes, it is a very easy shortcut, and unfortunately is taken all too often. I heard somebody jumping in when I was saying praise and faltering. Who was it?
Oh, that was me. Praise whoever. Praise whoever the fuck is gonna get you the brownie points. That's who you praise. Whoever you have to praise in order to be seen as virtuous, that is what you will do. And whoever you have to demonize, that is also what you will do. And that's, I mean, there really is this, like it is the quintessential scapegoat, right? You push, you project the sins of the entire community onto a goat, and then you sacrifice it. That's what you do, right? And when you are talking about identitarian politics, well, then you've got whiteness and maleness and all of that toxicity and all of there just ready to take on all of the sins of the entire community and then be sacrificed up to the I guess the gods of social cohesion. So yeah.
Now, this is something that I've been noticing in the news media for quite some time. Every time there is a tragedy, every time, and specifically a man, every time specifically a man gets in trouble for sexual misconduct. Actually, no, Prim, I'm not hearing you. Are you trying to talk? Okay, so I've got Prim in the chat saying she's trying to talk. I'm going to real quick finish what I was saying, and then I'm going to leave Discord and come back and see if that bring back our Prim. But yeah, they'll jump in before the bodies are even cold or before the story is even finished. Like with the Vegas shooting, we still don't have a handle on the causes, and yet we're hearing what they are from the mainstream press. So give me just a second here and we will see what happens if I pop out and pop back in. Okay, Prim, talk.
I am definitely talking. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Woohoo!
Hallelujah again.
Woohoo! It seems to be whenever I mute myself. Sometimes I just don't come back for you, at least. I don't know about if everybody else could have heard me before, but
it may be because I'm having to use Discord for web to do to show it on the screen.
That does it sometimes. Anyway, what I was saying is that they seem to be dropping a little bit of the pretense this time. I've seen a lot more articles saying, it's not just toxic masculinity that's the problem. It's that masculinity itself, in its whole, is toxic. And it just seems to be getting more and more. Clearly, men are the only problem. And it's often white men, and oh my goodness, what are we going to do about these white men that are always universally the problem?
Yeah, there was actually one writer, and I put an image of it up in the screen, and then I didn't think about the fact that I might also want to have that story up on my other computer screen, because, proper planning and all that. But there was one individual who they went through and tried to link this to literally everything. Like the whole controversy, not just men, not just toxic masculinity, not right wing or left wing. They tried to link it to Gamergate. They tried to link it to everything. And it was, I believe, let's see here, because it keeps coming up on the slideshow, but I can't, it's not big enough for me to see it. It's Ryan Cooper of The Week, and he wrote, "Toxic masculinity is a gigantic problem from the Santa Barbara gunman Elliot Rodger to misogynist gamers to President Trump, who was also credibly accused last year of the exact same crimes as Weinstein," which he wasn't. That's actually a bald-faced lie, but he published it anyway. So I mean, we've got this, like, they're just throwing in buzzword soup, anything they can come up with. This is connected to everything, anything that's remotely connected to men. There's another one that came out and said gun culture is inexorably connected to stereotypically masculine behaviors. It's a stereotypically masculine thing. I can talk tonight, really. But
You wore yourself out with singing too much.
there we go. But yeah, this has been a journey. Looking at the various news stories here, this has been a journey in I don't know what to put it, how to put it, other than virtue signaling by stepping on men. The idea that being accused, just accused, is the same thing as being guilty. That seems to be a common thread. The idea that if a man does something, it's masculinity and it's connected to all men, but if a woman does something, it's not connected to all women. That seems to be a common thread. There
Well,
are attacks on whiteness there. So it's everything. And I'm
well,
watching this happen and thinking, how can these people not realize how they look when they do this? Do they really think we're buying it?
Well, like you even just said, like you don't even have to do the thing. You don't even have to just be accused. You can do something that is vaguely similar to something that they don't like in their minds, and they will go ahead and shift it over to be full-fledged the thing that they don't like.
It comes down to the basic fact that I think this is often, for whatever reason, of course, this is my mindset on things, but it's often forgot or not paid explicit attention to that humans are a tribalistic species inherently, as is any kind of group-oriented species, high case selected species. We go towards our group. We tend to have a lot of in-group love and not inherently out-group hate. But there are reasons why we would have out-group hate, particularly as I've discussed in the past. One thing that can increase out-group hate is constant identity threats. So, for example, when you feel as though your identity is you feel in some way, for example, the left currently in the United States, with the election of Donald Trump, feels as if their identity has been threatened because, the guy in power, we were given every reason to believe Hillary Clinton would be president. My identity is being constantly threatened as a response to that. So it makes sense why what they would do in response is to demonize and stigmatize the outgroup in any way possible, because you are looking at the outgroup as a sort of folk devil or as an evil, an other. We always do this, though. Everybody does this. Every group does this. It could be, my sports team versus your sports team. This is inherent to human communication. It just so happens to be, in this case, one of the easiest ways is, as Karen said, with a scapegoat. That makes it easier to place the ills and badness of a group onto a certain individual and say, this is representative of the whole.
Oh, definitely. It's just strange now how they're taking such a large group, basically all men as a whole, and attributing that kind of hatred, negativity, anything like that to them. Like I can envision something like my baseball group hating your baseball group in a sense, but they're taking such an enormous group now and they're generalizing to such a wide portion of humanity. It just seems like it's getting a little bit out of hand now.
Well, I think we need to remind ourselves, and I think Aiden probably understands this better than anybody here, is that political policy or political beliefs are not the battle. They are the battlefield and the weapon, right? But they are not the battle. The battle is simply the division of human beings into categories of us versus them. And so, like, on that sort of very, very low, below human consciousness level, it is only about the us and the other. And so this I think is why you see, and this is one of the challenges that I gave to a lot of leftists who are absolute 100% Trump haters, right? If you can find me 5 things that Trump has done, right, that you agree with, that you think are good things, right, then I will take you seriously. But if you cannot, he gets the RNC to cheer over LGBTQ rights. He flies the rainbow flag at his rallies, right? He talks about, this, that, and the other. Like there are things. He says he's not interested in repealing, if that's even possible, Roe v. Wade, right? And or criminalizing abortion, right? Like all of these things that he has actually come out and said, I'm not interested in those things. I'm not interested in this. I'm not interested in that, right? The Supreme Court decision on gay marriage, it's done. I'm leaving it alone. These are things that any leftist, right, any progressive would be able to say, okay, he actually fucking did something good there, right? But what I see is that there is nothing that he can do, that he can ever do, that will be right in their eyes, right? And if he does something that they agree with, right, they will impute a malicious motivation on him for that. He's only doing that to pander to blah, 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 blah. He's only doing that to, I don't know, be sneaky and get something out of it, right? So when you look at how politics is playing out right now in the United States, it is 100% tribalism. There is nothing about policy in it. In the majority of the coverage, it is whatever shit we can get that will stick to Trump and make him look bad, we will deploy, right? And the other side is almost as bad, not quite, right? But it really is about the us and the other. It's not about policy. It's not about any given issue. It's about the us and the other. And that is a very, very old thing. So.
That's something that's been something that's been used to fuel everything from wars between nations to genocides to takeovers of entire areas. It's basically the way humanity has operated throughout history. And we would have been able to get past it. We were on our way to getting past it in the 90s. And all of a sudden, pundits came along and discovered they could ramp up the tribalism and pit people against each other, and that would actually help their careers. And I think that's part of the problem that we're seeing now, is rather than seeing people in not necessarily positions of power, but positions with big platforms, do this. Seeing people with the ability to reach thousands or hundreds of thousands generalize negative behaviors to masculinity, or generalize all crime to law-abiding citizens who own guns, or generalize all sexual misconduct to male sexuality. And this kind of thing should be getting shamed. People should be looking at it and saying, well, that's actually stupid. It's sensible to condemn the behavior. It's not sensible to try to link it to people who aren't guilty of it. But instead, they make themselves more powerful. They find themselves with a larger platform. They end up earning more money. The people that agree with them and who whose position they're furthering, they boost them for it instead. And it's like nobody's as embarrassed by this as they should be.
Well, no, I mean, I think, I have to disagree with you sorry about the noise in the background. I have to disagree with you a little bit in the terms of we could have gotten past it in the 90s. This is not something that you just get past. I mean, we could have found a different foil for it. We could have found a different way of defining the other. But when one of the most interesting things is when you look at, when civil rights happened, when second wave feminism all happened, right? And you're looking at this sort of massive inclusion of a massive expansion of who is the us in Western societies to include people of color on the same level as the rest of us, to include gays and lesbians, all of those things, right? What did we have? Well, we had the fucking Russians. We had the Soviets, right? we had the Soviets to preoccupy our us versus the other instinct. And we somehow all of this social progress happened when we were all focused on those bad guys over there rather than these bad guys among us, right? Our scapegoat was Khrushchev and the threat of nuclear war and communism. So I think that I don't think that we're never going to get rid of this. I think that it is fundamental. It is our double-edged sword. It is fundamental to human cooperation. If we didn't have this propensity, nothing you see when you look out your window, plus the window itself, plus the roof keeping the rain off your head while you're looking at it, none of that would exist without this. So there's no getting rid of it, right? There's only trying to figure out ways of harnessing it, maybe in less destructive ways. I would say an existential threat like global warming or whatever might be enough to focus our common cause, right, towards an external adversary that is maybe not as harmful as another population of people, right? But then again, what did we have? We have the balkanization of that argument into people who deny that it's happening, or people who are just saying maybe it is happening, but I don't think there's anything we can do about it. And all of the people who disagree are then othered and called denialists, and whether they agree or not that it's happening, they're called deniers. Right. So, I mean, we have this tendency to do this, and it's not just a matter of race. It's not just a matter of and I think men versus women is completely like that's the illusion, is that there is a men versus women tribalism. I think that women act as a political bloc in ways that men don't, but I think that it just does not fit. It's a different psychological. Sexism is completely different from tribalism, completely different. And right now in our society, for whatever reason, white males are everybody's scapegoat. Well, and much better if they're cis and straight as well. And if they're privileged, well, then you really hit the jackpot. So, I mean, this is really, I don't think we're gonna get past it.
I do think, though, that we were getting past racial tribalism in the 90s, and it's because I remember there was quite a bit of advancement and quite a bit of progress, not in a sense of political progressivism that's really that's really, I hate to use the term left because I don't consider it left. When I think of left, I think of the classic liberal, different strokes for different folks kind of person, the labor movement, stuff like that. And this quote unquote left, the progressive left was connected with things like eugenics, and it's almost so far around the circle that it's where the far right is considered to be. And I think we've talked about that before. But I think we've gotten to the point where we were making quite a bit of progress in terms of people not being at each other's throats. We had the civil rights movement. We'd had a lot of progress from a state where we were at each other's throats as over our differences, our racial differences, and then we'd had a point where we'd sort of gone after each other's throats over past racial inequalities and things like that, past gender inequalities, and then it was starting to come around to where we were striking a balance, where we were able to discuss the issues without letting anger and resentment and hatred and othering take over, and look for actual solutions to this is happening to people because of this thing that happened in the past. What can we do to correct that? And of course, like I said, with the advent, not necessarily the advent of political pundits that their whole gig basically is pushing the buttons
Race baiting.
on
Race
on
baiting,
racial
yeah.
inequality or gender baiting. And we've got both. We've got race baiting, we've got sex baiting. And it's that kicked in about mid 90s and just sort of shoved us right back into being at each other's throats over these things. So I do think we would have gotten past that. Whether we got past the ability, or not the ability, but the issue of othering, no, I don't necessarily think that it would have all been eliminated. It's centuries old, and it's almost, you could almost call it a human instinct. But
It is.
yeah, it's as far as it being connected to sex and race, I don't think that would have continued.
The interesting thing is that what we were seeing at that point is, if you look at Allport 1951, who is the seminal work on the contact hypothesis, is that the thing about the 90s, that went up until the 90s, why we were seeing this progression in the removal of division between race and ethnicity and gender, is because there was a greater enemy. Actually, pretty much all social psychologists agree upon this, that there will always be division among groups until there is a reason for groups to coalesce in opposition to a greater enemy. So in the case of the United States, why did we see an increment and an increase in people getting along? Well, yeah, it's because Russia was the enemy. We had a greater global enemy. And it's interesting because sort of the premise of Star Trek is that humanity is able to get rid of all of their identity politics because they're no longer in a Earth-based reclusive status. But Allport 1951, what he found through the contact hypothesis and what all subsequent research indicated, is that the mere exposure effect, meaning, and this is very interesting to me, because you will find this in the media, what, in terms of men and in terms of, I don't know, gun owners, anybody who is part of the so-called stigmatized group, what do we find? We find the media and the mainstream saying, do not interact with these people. Don't talk to them. Don't do anything with them. Just ignore them or cut them out of your life, block them on Twitter, do all of that. Because the research indicates that if you talk to them and you interact with them, you're more likely to be more sympathetic to them and not view them as an other.
You see them as a human being. And it's actually, there was a woman who did a project during, I think it was during the Trump presidential campaign, where she traveled all across the United States and she just sat down with people of, on both sides and did interviews with them. And I think she uploaded them to YouTube. She might be turning it into a documentary, but she just wanted to find out what people thought. And she figured that the best way to do that wouldn't be reading news pieces about, what motivates a Trump voter or whatever, right? Would not be, listening to her friends tell her what they think of these people, but to actually sit down and talk to them. And this is really, it's kind of the reason why, when you actually, because the tribalistic thing, and I said this about Chris Cantwell, the tribalism is we have the hardwiring for this mechanism in us, and it emerges around 8-9 months of age, when babies start to be able to crawl around on their own and might be outside of the supervision and protection of their parents for brief periods of time and might encounter strangers. And so this is when they start to make strange. It's also when they start to actively prefer people who look like their parents. So if their parents are white, they prefer white people. If their parents are Chinese, they prefer Chinese people. And this is just a normal thing. And this sort of exposure to people of, with different, morphologies, different skin color, different facial features, different hair, different everything, it really does allow a baby to humanize those other people, to include them in, these people are part of us, right? And so when you look at the whole idea, yes, behind behind somebody like Steve Shives, right, who goes out of his way to not hear anybody that he is demonizing. And he went all out over the MythCon thing just recently when Sargon and Shu and Armored Skeptic were invited to Milwaukee to and whatever at MythCon. Steve Shives uploaded a video where he calls them subhuman, he calls them monsters, he calls them all of these things. And the reason he's able to do that and to, I think, be sincere about that, I think he sincerely believes what he's saying. The reason he's able to do that is because he has isolated himself from ever speaking to them, ever having to hear what they have to say. He probably gets 90% of his information from what others say about them. And he never has to actually look any of them in the eye. Right. And that's really what it is.
It's called the cockpit effect. It's the specific psychological thing called the cockpit effect. Yep. Yeah.
You can only dehumanize someone insofar as you never get to know them.
All right. I'm going to interrupt with a couple of super chats, and then I'll go ahead and let Prim speak. She's got her name in next. So we have Joey Jojo, who gave us $5 and said, Miami Mike, I remember what you did at DragonCon. I have no idea what that's about.
Must be an inside joke.
It must be. Mitch gave us £2 and said, discuss. I don't know what I've never actually used this word out loud, only in text.
Aberrant.
Is it aberrant?
Aberrant meme thievery?
Yes, I don't know what meme I stole.
I stole his meme.
I see. Okay.
Oh.
And then we have
Shame on you, Aiden. Shame on you. You are subhuman.
Wait,
subhuman and a monster.
Wait. Since when do you have to make up all your own memes? The point of it being a meme is that everybody knows what it is and uses it, for crying out loud.
Is it meme appropriation?
Yeah, I guess that makes us a bunch of
what it is.
That makes us a bunch of meme girls. So Point Curation gave us $10 Canadian and says, much love to the work you do. You make society richer for being in it. I don't know if it's chauvinist to say, but I love the society that I am in. I don't think that's chauvinist. It doesn't fit the definition.
No.
So
it's very nice.
And with that, Prim, you're on.
Well, I was actually going to kind of play off of what Karen said, because I actually recently watched all of that stuff with Steve Shives and Shu and Skeptic, and honestly, they were just saying we should strive to listen to all ideas, even ones that we disagree with, in order to, broaden our minds and help us form a more rounded perspective. And in that one video that Armored Skeptic posted, I don't know if everybody has seen it, but basically he kind of goes over a lot of the points that happened with MythCon and talked about how this one fellow was totally willing to speak with him and Shu and say that there were points that I agreed with, there are points that I disagree with, and that's fine. But Steve Shives, on the other hand, was just completely unwilling to hear them at all. And you can really see the difference in the types of personalities these guys have. And it kind of makes me wonder how somebody like Steve Shives becomes so closed in on himself like that and is so totally able to and willing and even desiring to see people as monsters, even though, anybody with a functioning brain can see them standing on stage and saying perfectly reasonable things, The other thing that I wanted to mention just briefly was also that it's interesting how oftentimes these far left individuals who often propose that we respect other cultures, that we respect other identities, all this sort of thing. These are often the people who are pushing these kinds of negative stereotypes of men, masculinity, of white people, that kind of thing. And it just doesn't really seem to fit very well.
Of our own culture, right? And that I think that is the height of I hate to use terms like white guilt or white hubris, because I don't think that it's justified for whites to feel guilty. We're no better or worse than anybody else. But I think that because we, for whatever reason, germs, guns, and steel, for whatever reason, we were able to sort of become a dominant force on the planet for a long time, and still are in large part. I think that there is this kind of this feeling that that you know, and because there have been white supremacists and eugenicists in our past, right, and a lot of atrocities in our past, and we have agreed collectively that those things were not okay. I think that it's almost like it is a guilt and a form of hubris as well, because when you take responsibility for all of the evils in the world, you're essentially saying we're the only ones who would have been capable of doing that, right? Which means that we are superior in some way. And like, so I think Sargon, when he was doing his thing with Thomas Smith at MythCon, you know, he essentially caught him out in something that sounded extremely white supremacist. And he just came right out and said so. You sound like a white supremacist. You know, the guy said, an even playing field, right? Everything being equal allows white men to rule everything.
You know,
well, if everything is equal and white men can rule everything, then what does that say about what you think about white men?
It
Well,
says
they
the
sure
same
sound
thing.
superior.
Yeah, it says the same thing that believing in patriarchy theory says about feminist men. This idea that everything is their fault because they have the power to make everything happen. And it's just a slight flip. You know, real quiet, like when you shake the pan and your pancake flips over kind of flip. You don't even use a spatula, right? From the way that John C. Calhoun talked about black people when he was trying to excuse slavery. And he talked about them as if they were children that couldn't take care of themselves and had to have white people take care of them or they would end up dying in poverty in their old age. And it was like it was an inevitable thing, you know, that there's no way for him to get out of it except slavery. And today, we've got the same kind of talk being used to justify affirmative action type programs, to justify pushing a welfare system.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the welfare system isn't designed to help people. I know a lot of people think it really is, especially if they've never used it or if they depend on it for life. Those two groups of people really misunderstand what the welfare system is about. The former, because they want to feel good about participating in it as donors, and the latter because if they admit what they've been trapped in, that's quite discombobulating, and it would actually, I mean, I can't imagine how down I would be if I was in that situation and I realized that I'd bought into the biggest scam ever and couldn't get out of it. When I did have to depend on parts of the welfare system temporarily, you know, my biggest goal was to get out of it. And for
Yeah, I think
having
that's
that
most
as a
people.
goal, for having that as a goal, I was treated by the people whose job it is to keep that system going like I was doing something wrong. Shame on you for trying to better your life. Shame on you for trying to not need us. What the hell do you think you're doing? You should divorce your husband so you can still get benefits. Just because your income went up doesn't mean you don't have to, you know, you don't have to depend on us. You need a dysfunctional family, that's all. You know, that's what that system is for. And it is
Well,
targeted to
yeah.
minorities too.
Well, I think I will say that I think that the war on poverty which was the beginning of the welfare state as we know it now. I do think that was, at least on the part of voters, at least on the part of the electorate, well-intentioned. They were like, well, who doesn't want to help the poor, right? Who doesn't want to help the poor? Who doesn't want to feed starving babies? Who wants to cut, women and children loose and allow them to fend for themselves, cast them to the wolves? Who would want it? What kind of monster would want to do that, right? And I won't even say that I think that the way it was implemented was necessarily an intentional act of attempting to sort of keep certain people where they were.
Because if you say it's an intentional act, if you say it's an intentional act, that would be a monstrous conspiracy.
Well, it would be, right? And it absolutely would be. And I don't think that a lot of the politicians, I don't think that a lot of the electorate who are in favor of a social safety net and things like that. And I don't even think that the people, because the reason why men were initially able-bodied, employable men were initially excluded, and it was only women with children who didn't have a man in the home who initially qualified for welfare in the United States.
And there's a precedent for that in English common law. The poor laws, they had that.
Yeah, and I don't know that that's necessarily that the intention was, that the motivation was, we want to keep these people poor, right? And farm their votes. Yeah, I don't know that that's what that was, right? Because it's very hard to see, just like when people bring up well, feminism was funded by, the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers because they wanted to be able to tax, they want to double the taxes. Well, any economist is going to tell you that essentially that's not exactly how that's going to go. It's not going to double your taxes. It's going to drive wages down. It's going to, and you're going to have to subsidize women working, right? So you're not going to get more revenue. You're just going to get more red tape and bureaucracy and all of this, right? So yeah, it expands the power of the state, but it doesn't expand the revenue of the state. But I will say that, even if it was done with the best of intentions, the specific way it was implemented at the beginning, and I don't think it works quite this way now, but the way it was implemented at the beginning, where if you had an able-bodied, employable man in the house, you just didn't qualify. And so lots of men left their families, lots of women booted their husbands out. And that was so that they could secure a steady paycheck. And that never gives them any hope for the future, just keeps them alive in the now. The unintended, if those consequences were unintended, that does not make them any less of consequences, right? They're still consequences. It's still negative fallout. It's still something that we should be learning a lesson from, and nobody wants to look at it, honestly. And the moment that you actually talk about it in any kind of honest way, the moment that someone like Ann Coulter says, oh, well, since birth control, abortions have gone way up, right? Like, how the fuck do you explain that, right? Since women have gotten control of their fertility, they're using abortion way, way more. How do you even fucking explain that? Well, you need a sociologist to do it, and one who isn't indoctrinated in some kind of political or gender ideology. But
it's because they're not using the old-fashioned aspirin clasped firmly between the knees anymore.
Well, it's because in clinical trials, birth control has a failure rate of 0.2% or something like that. So 0.2% of women will get pregnant after a year of using it, but in reality, in practice, it's got a failure rate of about 9%. And so,
there's another thing that goes along with that. So you're on birth control. When you use hormonal birth control, and this is a clarification that's important, because if you're not using any birth control at all, you have a potential for pregnancy of about 20% each time you get pregnant. So you have an 80% birth control rate when you're not using anything. And that's even with not pulling out. But when you use hormonal birth control and then you go off of it, you have told your body that it's pregnant, and now your body knows it's not pregnant, and it's like, oh, I'm not pregnant anymore. I've got to get pregnant as soon as possible. And your chances of getting pregnant go up significantly after you go off of birth control.
There's several factors to that. It's also the factor that when we talk about the clinical trials, if you look at how a clinical trial works, you are put into a clinical setting where you have to take the pill at this time, every point, at the same time, every single day. It is under extreme stringency. And when you talk about the average person, yeah, they forget a pill every once in a while. But moreover, when we look at like why have abortions gone up as there has been the introduction of female oral contraceptives, well, kind of implicit in the introduction of female oral contraceptives is that I can have a little bit more leniency with my sex life. I don't have to be as worried, and I don't have to worry about getting pregnant. So, yeah, there's some question there. Of course, now, if you're not so concerned about pregnancy because you think you can avoid it because the box told you 99% effective, then you might be more likely to sleep around a little bit. And I know that's not a popular opinion, but it is what we see, I think, when we're looking at for example, even though, okay, so despite the fact that there is every single opportunity given to women now to be able to prevent conception, we have seen a massive increase in out-of-wedlock births, for example, and we've seen a massive increase in the number of abortions. And you can, muse on whether or not that's a good thing or a bad thing. I think with the out-of-wedlock births is unquestionably not a good thing. But, yeah, if you say there's less responsibility upon you and then it happens, well, then it happens. You gotta deal with it.
That's another thing. The ability to have an abortion when you get pregnant makes it more likely for women to not feel scared of being promiscuous or at least active. And at the same time, if they're not using the birth control pills correctly, all you need is for it to be ineffective because you took it at the wrong time of day, or you missed a day, or you've got a habit of missing days, or you're done using the pill and now you're trying to make do with spermicide and so on. You only got to have one get through.
And plus, there's the whole social attitude going around about like women's sexuality, and like look at how pro-life women, for example, are demonized these days. Every time you see somebody making a pro-life point, like they're completely demonized. They're told, "Oh, you are a completely anti-woman. You are such an idiot. You shouldn't be allowed in politics if they're a politician." All that sort of thing. Basically, they're implying now that in order to be non-misogynist, you have to be pro-choice because it's clearly exclusively the woman's choice. There is nothing possibly wrong with getting rid of a fetus because it's just a fetus, and how dare you think otherwise? So that kind of goes along with the whole, it kind of adds up with the birth control, the increased availability of abortions. Like there's a whole lot going on with all of it.
Well, I think too.
I'm gonna break into this real quick for just a moment, and rape the chat's ears. I have one more. Point Curation gave us another $2 Canadian and corrected chauvinist to sorry Western chauvinist, but I think it still doesn't fit the definition.
I do want to say that when women were liberated sexually from the inevitability of pregnancy when sexually active, that actually did take some of the constraints off of men, right? So, I mean, how many shotgun weddings have there been since birth control became a thing?
Oh, definitely.
Compared to prior.
Considerably less, yes.
Compared to prior. So what we're looking at is, we're looking at a situation prior to birth control where everybody was essentially, it took two to tango, right? You both knew what you were doing and what you were risking, and you're both going to fucking live with the consequences. And that involves getting married, right? And raising that kid proper, right? Because, abortion wasn't legal at that time either, right? So you're going to have a kid. You can't avoid it. The man is going to take responsibility because he knew just as well as she knew what the potential consequences were going to be, and we're going to hold both of you responsible in this way, right? Whereas now that women have birth control and abortion, there's no way that you can stand at gunpoint and say to that man, stand with a gun and say to that man, you're going to make an honest woman of her, right? Because she didn't have to get pregnant in the first place, and she doesn't have to go through with the pregnancy if she doesn't want to, and all of these things. So holding him responsible in that way is, it's, I think, even in our gynocentric society, I mean, we're happy to extract the money from him, but the whole, now you have to be married and, in an age before no fault divorce, you're now with this woman for the rest of your life. I don't think that I think that went away when birth control and abortion became options for women.
Well, I want to point out something because we're talking about this as though those only became options in the 20th century, and that's actually not true.
Well, birth control, we had condoms, and we actually had sea sponges soaked in vinegar and all kinds of little
I was going to
tricks that we had.
say, birth control has been something that's been done for centuries, but carelessness has also existed for centuries, and failure to plan ahead has existed for centuries, and so it's not like the pill actually freed women from anything other than having to dig for a condom at the last minute. To be honest, it wasn't so much an innovation in birth control that revolutionized women's ability to control their fertility as it was an innovation in convenience. You didn't have to worry about, do I have something on me? Do I have something on me I can use? Have I prepared something? You just take a pill every day.
Well,
that's the difference. And abortion has been practiced since, well, the dawn of time, really. It's just that it became safer as surgical methods were basically evolved. And honestly, as far as the legality of it, it wasn't outlawed all over the world, and it wasn't necessarily all outlawed in the United States either. You still could abort an ectopic pregnancy. You still could abort if the mother was going to die because of carrying the baby. It was simply not legal to use it as a form of birth control for in most states, or in several states, for part of the 19th and 20th centuries when there were laws related to it. And that was what everybody railed against. Not so much that women couldn't do it, but that they couldn't use it as a substitute for birth control, which existed before abortion.
Well,
before surgical abortion.
I do have to say that, the only women back in the late 1800s, early 1900s who would have even owned a condom, and it would have been washed and reused as needed, would have been prostitutes. And it's because it would be like 2 to 3 months' pay of a prostitute's earnings to even be able to buy one. So, I mean, you're looking at, it's not a matter of, do I have a Durex in my purse? You're looking at, have I invested a huge sum of money in this one thing that I now have to take very, very good care of, because I never want to have to go to the expense of replacing it. And the only people who would be interested in doing that, and who would have been going to the places where you would get those things, would have either been married women or prostitutes. It would not have been something that single women would have even necessarily known how to get. So
No, but there were other methods that people used. I don't have the article open, and I haven't been able to find it with a quick Google search, so I can't remember what the search was that I found it with before. But there were other methods of birth control prior to the use of latex condoms. And of course, they include sheepskin condoms. But there were things that people used that they weren't necessarily barrier methods. And actually, the rhythm method, everybody makes the joke, what do you call people who use the rhythm method? And the answer is supposed to be parents, but it's actually pretty effective if it's done correctly.
Absolutely.
When it's used properly, its failure rate isn't any higher than any other form of birth control. And that's been around for quite a long time. It predates latex condoms. So once again, it's like I said, it's not. I hate to sort of blame. I hate to blame pregnancy on lack of birth control because it's not true. But in any case, we're getting kind of far off topic here.
Way off topic.
And I wanted to
You're
bring
right.
it back around. This goes kind of back to blaming men for pregnancy, and I think I brought that up with the Knock Up Fairy video the last time. And that goes back into the differences in how sexuality is treated between men and women. Here we have Weinstein. Weinstein is, like, at first I thought, here's another guy being Cosby'd, right? He's got a bunch of people coming out and accusing him, and as soon as the first one comes out, all these other ones come out. But then there was that recording. And that recording pretty much nails it for me. That whether
I agree.
every accusation is proved or not, it's very clear that he is engaged in definite misconduct. And then it's come out since then also that there's a paper trail of people trying to do something about the problem, people trying to do something about his behavior. There's people who have tried to contact media, and media moguls have covered it up. Other people in Hollywood have covered it up. And it's not just men that have covered it up, it's been men and women who have covered it up. And yet we are hearing his behavior generalized to all men, as if all men are somehow responsible for the very disturbed behavior of one guy who has done something that is so rare that it's extremely newsworthy and everybody is reporting on it.
It was actually, from what I gather, it was actually excessive even for Hollywood.
Yeah, and if all men everywhere were doing this, it wouldn't be newsworthy. It wouldn't be getting reported on that this one guy did it. There might be reports about how all guys are doing it. There would be reports about what an epidemic we have of this happening, and there would be physical evidence to back it up.
Exactly.
But
Yeah, like
there's
if
not.
this one guy is doing something awful, then sure, let's shun this one guy because that is a terrible thing for anybody to do. But to go on and say that this is a men problem is ridiculous.
And this
It's
is
just
something
easy. Oh, I'm sorry. It's just easier, again, cognitively, in order to extend to the entire group. And no, it really is. It's easier for our brains to process on a group-based perception because the human brain, while it is an incredibly complex and fantastic mechanism, it's still a process of natural selection and evolution. As such, we tend to try to defer any amount of cognitive load we ever have. The more thinking we have to do, no, like, there's other things I could put my brain into processing, right? So
Would
it's much
rather
easier.
not. Yeah.
Right. So it's much
Well,
easier to say
if
all men. It's much
If
easier to say
one red berry
yes.
makes me sick, then all red berries make me sick.
It's safer to just avoid them at that point, right?
Yes.
That's right.
This is basic cognitive processing. It is the most basic level of how people think. And when you look at, the way I look at stuff, and I think that we all need to, is you got to look at why things happen from an evolutionary perspective. And when you start looking at it from an evolutionary perspective, it all starts making a little bit of sense.
I think that's actually one of the biggest things that we lack in society is sort of a meta awareness of our own behavior and what are the ultimate causes of it. So when we look at, a lot of people will just go along with this whole it's the privileged white male, who feels entitled to women's bodies and sees women's bodies as public property and all of this crap, right? Because he's a red berry, just like all the other red berries, or all the other red berries are just like him, right? But I think that if we could actually have a way of getting across to people that not all of these knee-jerk reactions that we have are actually telling us something useful, at least not in this environment, that many of them are better safe than sorry kind of responses, right? Like it's sort of that instinctive fear of snakes that we have, right? That snake handlers in India and stuff, they acclimatize their babies to devenomed snakes, right? They'll sit their baby right in the middle of a snake pit, because that is the way to train your baby to not be afraid of snakes. Because your baby is just going to naturally be afraid of snakes, unless your baby is a psycho like my daughter was, who would pick up any kind of big, fat, hairy, brown spider and try and make friends with it. Okay. When she was 2 years old. But that exists for a reason. Because if you're walking through the bushes, right, and you see a stick that looks like a snake and you jump back, right? Oh, well, no harm done, right? But if you see a stick that isn't actually a stick, it was a snake, and you step on it, right, and you get bit, then you're dead.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
That's
I
a
think
cognitive heuristic.
yes.
Called, yeah.
And I think that we need to actually get more proactive about challenging those kinds of things in society. Like, for example, the whole biologically ingrained in us that we need to get as much sugar and fat as possible because that's what kept us alive in the past. Obviously, that is a bad thing these days, because overindulging in those things in an environment that has an abundance of those things has led to the increasing amounts of obesity in not only in our society but across the world, right? And clearly that has become maladaptive. And just the same as these other like heuristics, these other schemas are leading us to, well, maybe not specifically us, because we're sitting here challenging them right now, but are leading some people to be perfectly okay with saying, this one guy has done a terrible thing, therefore it's just safe to go ahead and avoid all men. That needs to be challenged more often. These things should not be being wholeheartedly accepted by all. There are lots of things that we don't do anymore just because it's not appropriate for our animal brains to control us and say that it's totally okay to do these things in society. We need to say that this is not something that we should accept. This is something that we should challenge. And I feel like we're not doing that enough.
I think there's a difference, I suppose, that occurs between people who have those reactions in a lazy way, the knee-jerk way, and people who are able to differentiate between when those reactions are functional and when they're dysfunctional. And you see in life people having greater success when they have that reaction, they analyze that reaction, and if they find it to be dysfunctional, they discard it and move on. And that's how we end up with people being able to do jobs like snake handler, but it's also how we end up with people being able to get through dangerous situations, that where everything might feel like it's dangerous, but they have to focus on the few things that actually are dangerous, pay attention to those things, and then navigate everything else that is not necessarily dangerous without
Definitely.
avoiding, and there are times when you're going through life and you run across something that, maybe it feels similar to something that was dangerous or poisonous or whatever, but it's not the same. And if you make that mistake, you miss out on something important. And it's a rather frequent thing. And if you are the lazy type that knee-jerk reacts to everything, you miss out on a lot. And I think that's what we're seeing now is an increase in that laziness that causes people to miss out on a lot or to demonize a lot. And
Yeah,
while
well,
I've got it up on the screen, Joey Jojo gave us $5 and said feminism says men shouldn't look at, walk near, talk to, or find me attractive. Also, feminists say men shouldn't have alternatives to women. Men can't be single. And that is a good point. Feminists spend a lot too much time dictating what men should or shouldn't be or have, and they end up contradicting themselves quite a bit.
Yeah, well, I mean, what I one thing that you did say about missing out on a lot of things, like it just reminds me of this. I think it was Carlsberg beer commercial, if I recall right. And what they did was they had, it was a candid camera thing where they had a young, preppy kind of couple going into a movie theater, and there's only 2 empty seats, and every other seat is full of these bikers. Okay, like these like leather clad, bearded, scruffy looking, nasty looking bikers. And there's only 2 seats. And couple after couple go in and they're like, no, let's not even, right? And then the few couples that go and they just like go and they sit down in these 2 empty seats, right? Sandwiched in between all of these bikers. And they sit down. The moment they sit down, the guys on either side of them crack a Carlsberg, hand it to them, and all of them cheer, right? You got over your initial, you did it. You did it. It's intimidating, right? And you still came in and sat with us, have a fucking Carlsberg. So
well,
it was a great commercial. It was an awesome commercial.
And I think it is intimidating for a lot of people, but I don't know, maybe I hesitate to suggest this because I feel like it's just this idealistic thing that's never going to be actually implemented in society. But I feel like maybe in school, perhaps we should put more focus on teaching people about these kinds of cognitive biases and how to avoid them. So that way we're not all just making these mistakes over and over and over again.
Yes. I wanted so much. You have no idea.
Just being able to have a meta awareness of why you behave the way you do, why you feel the way you do.
Yes, exactly.
Allows you to, I mean, you still maintain your instincts. You still react. You still have the initial reaction that's going to save your life when that stick is actually a snake, right? But at the same time, you might not necessarily, be so terrified of the stick that you manage to stumble off the path and over a cliff, right?
Yeah, I get that sometimes just in odd situations where normally I would have, the knee jerk, this is dangerous reaction. And then this one instance comes up and something is different and I know something is different. And so I take a minute and think about it and I don't have the same reaction. And one of them, not too long ago, actually, I almost got yelled at for it too, but I picked up a hitchhiker. And they say never pick up hitchhikers. Hitchhikers are dangerous and scary. And this was, a guy walking out alone at night in the dark and not in one of the better sections of town, and it was raining and nasty out and I was by myself in the car. And here's this guy ran right out in front of my car on an exit ramp from I-75 onto a busy, like 40-mile-an-hour road. And so I'm like, holy hell, what the hell? And he wasn't, I say hitchhiker, he wasn't actually hitchhiking. He was moving rather quickly, and he looked worried. And he had his collar turned up against the storm. He wasn't trying necessarily to get my attention until he did by walking out in front of my car. And then he apologized to me. I rolled my window down to see if he was okay, and he apologized to me. And I could tell he had, a piece of reflective tape on his jacket. He wasn't trying to run away from somebody and hide, or he wouldn't have had that on. So I took him to where he was going. Turned out he was actually on his way to meet some people at a gas station down the street where they were going to take him to the hospital where his wife was in labor. But I did. I had people say, "Oh, you picked up a stranger in the dark in your car. How dangerous, how crazy, how stupid, what kind of an idiot are you? You could get killed doing that." Well, I don't pick up every hitchhiker I see. But that was a person who was quite obviously in need. And it wasn't obvious where it was blatant. He wasn't standing there with a big help sign, but there were things that were different about this particular person's behavior from your average hitchhiker and from people that have presented a danger to me in the past. And the fact that he wasn't trying to get my attention made a difference as well. So I mean, it's one of those things where I would have lost a chance to help somebody, and this guy would have taken that much longer to get the several blocks down to the gas station where he was going to meet his ride to the hospital, and he would have been caught out in the rain and the cold and possibly gotten sick later on from his body being compromised by the temperature and all that. And
Yeah. That's a
it
great
all
story. Good
depends
for you
on.
for helping out.
Well, the thing is, your instincts are not necessarily always wrong, and the lessons that you learn in life are not necessarily always right. And sometimes one detail, like the reflective tape on the jacket, made a difference. If it had just been a person in a black coat with their collar up around their face running, I'd have thought, oh, there's a person running from the cops, right? But nobody wears reflective tape to run from the cops, So it's one of those where just because you've learned a certain thing is dangerous doesn't mean that attention to detail can't show you that in this circumstance it's not. Carl English gave us €5, and he said, "When Hollywood dies, look to the other alternatives of entertainment. By the way, Hollywood should die. That's your mission, or there's your mission, America, through the wallets." And I will say Hollywood could die. There's no reason why we have to have Hollywood to make movies. It could be done anywhere. You can run a video camera anywhere, and it's becoming cheaper and cheaper to get cameras that have a high enough resolution that you could make a movie on a big screen. So I go for it. Hollywood sucks. Not all of Hollywood, but quite a lot of Hollywood sucks.
Well, the casting couch is like, I mean, the casting couch. The casting couch. Every single human being on this planet above the age of maybe like 17 knows what the casting couch is.
That's true. Actually, now that's something that, oh gosh, which of the articles that I read, somebody pointed that out. Everybody knew this was going on. This was a widespread, like it wasn't some big secret.
No.
It was actually all over Hollywood. Everybody knew this was going on, and everybody was afraid to.
Everybody in particular knew it in association with Weinstein. He had a particular reputation. Even, like I said, he was exceptional even for Hollywood, right? And Hollywood has this massive, I mean, you look at Milo and, before he got into trouble over his pedophile apologia and things like that, apologia. But he was talking about, parties where you had, in his words, very young boys, but clarified twinks, right? So who were desperate for work, all drugged up and having sex with much older men, right? You have the dude from the Goonies or whatever, Corey Feldman.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Corey Feldman has talked about this a lot, and people made fun of him for it. He was soundly ridiculed by a lot of the same media that are now eating crow because it's coming out that they had the opportunity to expose this time after time and didn't.
Yeah, well, and you look at Elijah Wood saying, like, it's only because my parents, right, were right there in the room with me every single fucking time I interacted with these people that I managed to not be taken advantage of as a young child, right? as a boy, that his parents were super careful, super fucking careful to keep a close eye on him all the time, right? So you have all of this, leading up to, like, it's never been a fucking secret. It's never been a fucking secret.
No, Hollywood's worst kept secret. I think that's the way it's being referred to quite a bit. And I'm seeing a consistent theme in the way people talk about it. They talk about all the people who knew about it and how individually they were all intimidated one way or another from exposing it. The news media didn't say it, didn't publish any stories because his lawyers contacted them. Individuals who spoke to the media or went to the police were silenced by lawyers and so on. But that's all individually. And
Well,
if it really genuinely is Hollywood's worst kept secret, if everyone in Hollywood knew this was happening, and they knew it for years and years and years, it strikes me as rather strange that at no point did anybody consider the idea of getting together with a lot of other people who knew this was going on and disapproved of it and wanted to do something about it.
well, that would mean somebody would have to take the initiative, and that's, when you look at it, Gwyneth Paltrow, Angelina Jolie, right? They had enough work already under their belts, right? And Gwyneth Paltrow, he pressured her for sex when he just signed her for the movie Emma, which was her breakout role, but she'd had 14 credits prior to that. Angelina Jolie, she had 8 credits prior to when he did this, to her, and she also has her very, very famous dad and her 2 very famous godparents, who include Maximilian Schell, right? So, I mean, these 2 women, and Paltrow was married to, I believe she was married to Brad Pitt at the time, and Brad Pitt actually confronted Weinstein about it. And then Weinstein told Paltrow that if she ever wanted to work in this town again, she'd keep her fucking mouth shut, right? But neither of these 2 women had to put out for him in order to keep their careers. Angelina Jolie said that she quietly warned all of the noobs who came across her path to steer clear of him. Okay. Now, I don't know whether either of these women understood or knew that there might be something illegal going on, right? Because I don't know necessarily how much pressure he applied to them, whether it was anything like in the recording of the Ambra Gutierrez. I don't know whether they knew that they could have been coerced if they were like real noobs. If they were real noobs and were depending on him being on his friendship with them.
Well, there's
right?
There's a thing that predators do, and unfortunately, I've had all too much experience with this. They push in increments. They don't start out with a strong, hard, forceful push necessarily on on you. If they're trying to stay under the radar, and they're trying to make you feel like you are a participant in the particular thing that they did. And this has been something that I'm not just talking about sexual predators here. I'm talking about financial predators. I'm talking about users who get you to do their job at work while they take credit for it. Any kind of predator does this. That's basically social predators. And they're not a big percentage of the population. It's not like everywhere you go, half the people you meet are going to be this type of person. But maybe like 1 in 25, maybe a quarter of the people, maybe, or I'm sorry, not 1 in 4, but like 1 in 25. So, a fairly small percentage of people, around the same, I suppose, as sociopaths, and that's not necessarily inconsequential there either. But they'll get you to do a small favor, and then they'll get you to do a bigger favor, and they'll get you to do a bigger favor.
Yeah.
And it's because once you've done a favor for somebody, once you have conceded a little bit of space to somebody, or a little bit of
Yeah.
your personal freedom, or a personal liberty to somebody, you're predisposed to give them a little more and a little more and a little more. And the other end of it is you're also you incrementally get to the point where you feel embarrassed to complain because you said yes to all these other things, right? Well,
Yeah, yeah. No,
no,
I get
yeah,
that.
I took the trash out for her, and then I went ahead and finished up her numbers, and then next thing I know, I'm counting down the
N-
entire safe, even though it's not my
Now,
job, or
now I don't want to. Now I don't want to admit that she was able to
walked
take
all
advantage
over
of
me.
me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I
Um.
can't complain because it's only a little more than the last thing. And if I thought the last thing wasn't so bad, how can I say this is so bad?
Well,
So that's
what
for
I
them to not necessarily know. And the thing is, if these are women that are very dignified. These two women, Paltrow and Jolie, are both. They have a lot of poise and they have a lot of presence. That's one of
yeah
the reasons why they are top tier actresses. It might
yeah
also be a reason why they were not. They passed all the tests, all the predator don't touch me tests, and they
yeah
may not have experienced the same degree of push, the same assault, basically, that
yeah
women who show themselves to be more vulnerable, who allow that incremental encroachment to take
yeah.
place. Now, this is not to
I
say that women are at fault when somebody does something like that, but it is a way to make yourself less vulnerable, to learn not to tolerate that incremental encroachment. So there's sort of a double-edged sword for you there. One more thing, Cap Strong gave us $5 and said, wasn't this enabled by female assistants, women feeding women to the beast? And that is true.
um yes, no, and it
Yeah.
wasn't just enabled by female assistants who were setting up the next thing and the next thing. Okay, it was enabled by every single one of those women who sued him, okay, signed a fucking non-disclosure agreement that did not, in some cases, would not allow them to talk about it with a spouse or a counselor, with a therapist, okay? And also some of them signed affidavits, swore affidavits claiming that the incident in their statement of claim was actually not true, right? And they did this for cash settlements. So much for the fucking sisterhood. So much for women protecting other women, right? Now, I want to, if you're gonna talk about how this whole casting couch thing and Weinstein is toxic masculinity, which, okay, if you're going to talk about toxic masculinity rather than just masculinity, maybe you might have a point. Well, isn't toxic femininity taking money and throwing your sisters under the fucking bus? Throwing other women under the fucking bus for money from a man?
That's a good point, although I'm going to go back to my frequently made statement that toxic masculinity, the way feminists use the phrase toxic masculinity, doesn't have anything to do with actual masculinity. They like to generalize dysfunctional behaviors and dysfunctional traits that are genderless to all men and only men as a way of demonizing
I know.
masculinity. Now,
But
that's not to say that there isn't room for a discussion on social imposition of stereotypes and standards that are harmful. That there's plenty of room for that discussion. It's just I hate the term toxic masculinity because that's how feminists use it, and it's not helpful or functional. It's just about demonizing men.
well, I just have to think, okay, because this is a man who has like billions of dollars, right? He's like tons and tons of money. So, like honestly, was that $200,000 or whatever it was that one of them might have collected, right, from him? Is that punitive in any way? Is that justice in any sense of the fucking word, or is it just free fucking money? I got dicked when I didn't want it, right? And I got to cash in. Well, how is that any different from, like, oh yeah, I fucked a guy who paid me $200,000.
Yeah, it's not different, and you're right. It obviously wasn't punishment because it didn't get him to stop.
No, and honestly, I want people to actually start looking at these lawyers because, if it's the same fucking lawyer who's negotiating all of these settlements, these sealed settlements, and coercing all of these false affidavits out of these women, okay, they have to realize after, I don't know, the 5th or 6th or 10th one that they're having to deal with that has almost an identical freaking details, right? That what they're dealing with is a complainant who is telling the truth, right? And that means that when they get those women to swear an affidavit that it never happened, they're suborning perjury.
Yeah, you would
right?
think that would
And
be illegal.
when they negotiate settlements with broad non-disclosure agreements that forbid these women from telling anybody what happened, they are actually facilitating the future crimes of their client, which is also illegal.
You would think that there wouldn't need to be any new laws passed to put a stop to something like that. But obviously, whatever laws we have in existence now, they're not preventing lawyers from doing stuff like this. Because Harvey Weinstein is not the only person who has ever used an attorney to silence someone who could have testified to a criminal act. Corporations do it on a regular basis. This is one of the reasons why I say corporations become little governments unto themselves. They can get you to sign a non-disclosure agreement as part of even of your employment. You can be, if you want to have a job there, asked to sign, non-disclosure agreements that prevent you from testifying in court if they commit certain types of crimes, like financial crimes. This is something that should never happen. They should never be able to hold someone to an agreement that prevents them from testifying in court if they witnessed a crime or if a crime was committed against them.
Or from reporting it to the police.
Or from reporting it to the police or anything really to do with a crime. If somebody has committed a crime, it should not be legal for them to use any kind of legal force to prevent any kind of whistleblowing, even if you go to the media. But it happens all the time. It happens not just in terms of situations like with Harvey Weinstein, but in terms of companies failing to pay people properly, companies dodging taxes, companies manufacturing products badly that end up doing damage to people and leaving them, with a need to sue, things like that. And they get away with it because they get people to sign non-disclosure agreements, and they can sit in the courtroom and say, I have an agreement with my company, I can't answer that question. And the courts tolerate it. Now, the only reason why that would be tolerated when we have laws that allow, a judge can order you to testify and call it contempt of court if you refuse. And as long as you're not at risk for incriminating yourself, you can be forced to testify on all manner of things. Courts are only tolerating this because it's lawyers, and that's how lawyers make their money. And judges are lawyers. They were lawyers before they were judges. So for them, they're accustomed to it. It's business as usual. And they don't maybe think about the fact that this really should be considered illegal based on the existing laws. But I would say there needs to be some sort of legislation to clarify that. It should be illegal in a non-disclosure agreement to suborn an illegal act. And any contract, just like any other contract, any agreement like this, that requires you to commit an illegal act, or that places a legal restriction on you from reporting a crime, should be considered invalid. The entire thing should be invalidated by that effort, by that part of it. All right. Did I lose everybody, or did nobody else have anything
I
to
think
say on that?
at least I'm thinking. Yeah. So
Oh, hey. Sorry about that noise, but I missed one of the millions of spiders. That,
Uh-oh.
Ooh.
well, I got it.
oh god.
That one
Yeah,
was
but if
almost
there's
as big
millions
as my
of them,
thumb.
that's not good.
Oh, yeah, no.
Oh,
Well, I was in Australia. Like, I go to Australia, right? Not one spider do I see the entire time I'm in Australia. The only thing I saw, the closest thing I saw to a spider, was a daddy long leg. Not any real spiders, right? I get home, and they're everywhere in my apartment. Like, everywhere. I'm going, what the hell? They're all
Oh,
around my computer.
dying.
They're all in my chair. There were numerous times where I put my headphones on, and 20 minutes later I had spider bites all down my arm. And there were
oh
itty
my
bitty, teeny
gosh.
weeny little spider bites. So I start looking around because the spiders were all little too, right? Had a egg sac hatch
Oh
in my
God.
stuff.
Remind me
Oh,
never to visit your house.
Well, and I ended
Did
up
I ever
having to spray for them and everything, and I got most of them, and I killed numerous little spiders all over the place. But apparently one escaped until tonight.
did
Poor
I ever tell
fucker's
you
dead now.
did I ever tell you about that time? It was early spring. It was the first time we took the kids out and sort of just let them play in the yard in the spring. This was in Port McNeil, so we don't really get cold winters. We get maybe 2 weeks of snow, and that's about it. Um, and my daughter, who was at the time scared of nothing, she was about a year and a half old, and she goes under the balcony into the toy chest, the outdoor toy chest, and within 2 minutes, she has like 15 freaking spiders crawling all over her.
Ugh.
Oh.
Okay, so I spend several hours with a broom pulling everything out from under the balcony and killing. I think I squashed about 600 giant fat frickin' spiders and tore down hundreds of egg sacs. And by the time I was done, I had nightmares for weeks about the revenge of the spiders, right? Like every time could feel them, like I'm dragging the egg sacs down from the rafters, and I'm almost like feeling spiders on my back, and it's just like, oh, it's so freaking creepy. It was just the most nasty thing ever.
And the worst part of that is every little tickle anywhere on your skin when you're dealing with something like that, it must be a bug, right? And
Oh yeah.
so I had this this experience. The only time I really got my ass chewed at work bad was a spider. And this was the restroom at the gas station where I used to work. The night shifters were responsible for cleaning it, and I was I was I was in there during the day, just a few hours after the night shift was over. And I get done, wash my hands, go back into the kitchen, and I feel this tickle down the back of my pants. And I'm like, oh crud, I caught a hair. I have, my hair falls out. Like I get these weird, they go through my shirt and they'll weave themselves in and out of the fabric, and they'll weave themselves down through, and they keep moving throughout the day and find their way into my pants and my underwear. And so I'm like, well, it's just a hair. And I was
Oh
fine,
no.
and it's really driving me nuts. And I'm like, I can't just go back into the restroom. I just got out of the restroom. I'm gonna get in trouble. They're gonna think I'm trying to spend all day in the restroom. No, I finally got bit, where the nerves were good and sensitive. Um, and I go running into the restroom, and there take pants down. And there is a big brown wood spider. I think we know them as fisher spiders. We call them wood spiders because they like to live in the wood pile, but a fisher spider. Those things get, like, this one was hair, or legs and all was about the size of a quarter. but those things can get legs and all as big as my hand. And
Yeah.
but that, like, I had bites all down my butt. And that little sucker
Oh,
got
Jesus.
friendly before I detected it. And so, like, I had that knee-jerk reaction to spiders a lot for a long time. But now I think the invasion of the spiders from the egg sac has sort of acclimated me to the point where I see one on the wall and just reach out and thunk it if it's where I don't want it to be. Or I'll catch
If
it in a cup and move it if I feel like I can.
if
But
it's a little one, it's not so bad, but if it's one of those big ass house spiders that are like
yeah.
loony sized, then it's like,
Yeah, if it's brown and it's got a couple of lines along its back, it's darker brown lines along its back, lighter and darker. That's the Fisher spider. Those things get pretty big. But
We
yeah.
have
Anyway, but that's
giant house spiders in BC in on the island that were imports from Britain, and they're huge, and they really like to come in the fall. And of course, there's no screens anywhere because you don't need them because there's no mosquitoes. So obviously, you don't need screens in your windows. So yeah,
yeah.
lovely.
But yeah, now anytime I get a hair that works its way down the back of my pants, I have to go in the restroom and make sure it's a hair, get rid of it. So
no
yeah.
kidding.
Now I have hand lotion because I wash my hands a lot more going down the back of my pants to get rid of hair. But and I can't do that without washing my hands because I'm a little OCD about that. Um, but in any case, there's my knee-jerk reaction story, and that's more dysfunction. And I think, I don't know, guys. Do you think we have cleansed
Yeah,
our
a little
souls
bit,
of the
yeah.
propaganda and talked poor Weinstein to death?
I think so.
Alrighty. Well, in that case, I have something to shill. Folks, if you want to join the chat, please go to the Badger live streams channel for every show. Obviously, we also have our chat available in several other areas. You can join the chat on the main Honey Badger channel. You can join the chat, I think, on Facebook. There are 8 different chats that go through the all chat box that you can see in the window there. But definitely go to the Badger live streams channel. And if you don't want to wake up one morning and find yourself unable to find our content because YouTube finally dropped the axe on our channels, go to badgerfeed.com. We're going to be moving to a digest format for podcasting too. So if you are listening to this in an audio format and you still want to follow our uncut live streams, you will also be able to find those at badgerfeed.com. So just go to badgerfeed.com. Do it! And with that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for tonight's Badger Talk. Thanks to my co-hosts for sharing their thoughts on the show. And thanks to Brian Martinez for helping to make sure we got a smooth start. Good night, all. See you next week for more discussion on the marriage mandate.